Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are on page 1 of your brand new student journal. So we're on page 1 and we're starting our geometry unit. So our objective today is, today I will identify quadrilaterals based on their attributes. That's how we pronounce that word. Okay, that's quite a long goal or objective for the day, so I'll give you some time to write it. It says, today I will identify. Identify just means to be able to kind of find or to label. Quadrilaterals. When you see the word quad, hopefully a 4 pops in your mind. Quad. So quadrilaterals based on their attributes. Okay, attributes. Attributes are like their characteristics. It's what makes them who they are. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing today. We have a lot of new vocabulary that we're going to look at. Okay, so here's our first word is congruent. Congruent means same size of equal measure. So congruent pretty much means equal, but when you say congruent, you're not talking about numbers, you're usually talking about shapes. Okay, so congruent. A quadrilateral is a closed shape with 4 straight sides. 4 straight sides. So I'm going to draw this in red, boys and girls, which means you're not drawing this. So a quadrilateral, that would be 1 side, 2 sides, 3 sides. We can't do a 4th side like that because that's not straight. So that's not a quadrilateral. So any closed, so here's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not a quadrilateral either because there's an opening in it. So that doesn't work either. So it has to be closed with 4 straight sides. Okay, and then they give us an example of what not closed means. Okay, then they show us these symbols, these little dashes, and it shows equal sides. So when we look here, I'll show you them. They're really small, so you're gonna have to look really close, okay? Okay, so then it says we have 5 quadrilaterals that we're going to be learning about. The first one is a trapezoid. A trapezoid. And it says at least 1 pair of opposite sides are parallel. So in this trapezoid, I'm going to highlight it so you can see these 2 lines are parallel. Parallel means that they'll never touch. If those 2 lines, if I got a ruler and I kept drawing them, they're never going to touch. So I'm going to show you some examples of parallel lines here. So these 2 lines are parallel. Because if I keep going, they're not going to touch. These 2 lines are not parallel. What's going to happen when they keep going? Dut, 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 dut. Do you see how they touched right there? So parallel lines mean when they go on and on forever, they'll never touch. These 2 lines aren't parallel because they're already touching. Okay, our next word is a parallelogram. It says both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. Both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. Okay, so both sides are congruent means they're equal. So this line and this line or side, they're congruent, which means they're exactly the same size, but they're also parallel. They're never going to touch. And then this side and this side are congruent, which means they're exactly the same size, and they'll also are parallel, which means they'll never touch. They also tell us opposite angles are equal. So this angle right here, this angle is the same as that angle. See how they're both wide? Those are opposite. And then this angle right here, see how this is a smaller opening? It's congruent to that. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of attributes that make a parallelogram. Okay, our next one is called a rhombus. A rhombus says all sides are congruent. All sides. They also put these little dashes to tell you that they're all equal. So all four of those sides are exactly the same. And then it also tells us both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. So this side is parallel to that side. And then this side is parallel to that side. It also tells us opposite angles are equal. So just like we had in the parallelogram, this angle right here is equal to that one, and you can kind of see how those are wide. And then these inner ones, I'm trying to show you with different markers, are equal. So this has all the same rules as the parallelogram or attributes, but it has another rule, they're all equal. The parallelogram weren't equal, just opposite ones were equal. Here, all four sides are equal. Okay, our next one is a rectangle, and you've known about this shape since you were in kindergarten. You probably just didn't know all the attributes. So it says both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. So this side is equal to that side, and this side is equal to that side. It also says both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. So the green sides will never touch and the orange sides will never touch. And then what makes it special is it says all four angles are right angles. These little boxes here are a symbol that show they're right angles. So I always think I can put like a little square piece of paper perfectly in there. Okay, our next one is called a square. And again, you've probably known this shape since you were little. You just probably didn't know all the attributes. It says all sides are congruent. All sides. So 1, 2, 3, 4 congruent sides. Opposite sides are parallel, and all four angles are right. So again, it has the same rules as the rectangle, but it has another rule. It has to have four equal sides. Okay, boys and girls, before I get started, we're going to actually take some more notes. I know today's a big note day, but I want you to turn to this page on page 2, and I'm going to zoom out because we're going to do some writing on this. Okay, so what I want you to know about this page is that these shapes have more than one name. So we would call this like its most specific name, but it could also be called something else. So the way the arrows work is everything above it, it could also call that name. So this shape is a trapezoid. That's its most specific, best name. But it also follows the rules of a quadrilateral, which means it's closed, has four sides and four angles. So this trapezoid could also be called a quadrilateral. And you're going to see that on some of your test questions. They're going to ask you what are all the names it could be called. So it could be called a trapezoid or a quadrilateral. This is its best name, but it could also be called that. Okay, let's look at this next shape. This is called a parallelogram. But this so that's its best name, but it also follows the rules of a trapezoid, because a trapezoid said it just has to be a quadrilateral. This is a quadrilateral. It's a closed four-sided shape, and it has to have at least one pair of opposite sides. Well, the parallelogram has two pairs of opposite parallel sides. So this shape could also be called a trapezoid. And it also could be called a quadrilateral. Oh, sorry if that's hard to see. So this shape, you could call it three different names. A trapezoid, a quadrilateral, or its best name, a parallelogram. Okay, if you're seeing how the arrows go, so I'm going to follow the arrows. This next shape is a rectangle. That's its best name, but it also could be called everything above it. So this shape could also be called a parallelogram because it follows the rules of a parallelogram, which are two pairs of opposite parallel sides. It also could be called a trapezoid because a trapezoid only has to have one pair of opposite parallel sides. And it also could be called a quadrilateral. So this shape could be called 4 different names, but this is its best name. Okay, let's go up to this rhombus. A rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 equal sides. So it's like a special parallelogram, but it also could just be called a parallelogram because it follows the rules of a parallelogram. It has 2 pairs of opposite parallel sides. It could also be called a trapezoid because a trapezoid has to have at least 1 pair of parallel sides. So this has 2 pairs, so it could be called that. And it could also be called a quadrilateral because it's a 4-sided, straight-sided shape. So this could be called all of those names. Okay, our final one is a square. And look at, a square is coming from all of them. So square is like the most specific shape. It has the most rules it has to follow. It has to follow the square rules, but it also follows the rules of a rectangle. It also follows the rules of a rhombus. It also follows the rules of a parallelogram. It also follows the rules of a trapezoid. And it follows the rules of a quadrilateral. So all of those names work for the square. The square is its best name or its most specific, but these all work. Friends, this is going to be a really important page. So I know there's a lot of writing, but I want you to pause your video and make sure you have all this writing down before you go on. Okay, so I want you again, friends, to make sure you have all this writing down because it's going to be really important that you know this. Okay? Okay, I'm going to get started on mine. Here is my first problem. And I'm going to zoom in now that I'm done with that. It says, use the clues to list all the possible names for this quadrilateral. Circle the most specific name. I have 4 equal sides. So if I look at my shape one, which ones has 4 equal sides? Ooh, only these 2. These are the only 2 with 4 equal sides. And then it says I have 4 right angles. Ooh, the square has right angles, but this one doesn't have right angles. Right angles are the perfect squares. So my shape must be a square. But then it says they want me to list all the possible names. What else could a square be called? Well, I just wrote those all down here. A square could also be called a rectangle. It could also be called a rhombus. I'm using my notes to help me. It could also be called a parallelogram. It could also be called a trapezoid. And it could also be called a quadrilateral. Now I circled square because that's its best name. And then they want me to draw it. Well, a square looks like that. And then these little dashes show that those sides are equal. And then these little squares here show that those are right angles. Okay, let's look at my next one. My next one says, identify the most specific name of the quadrilateral in the picture. List 2 attributes. Well, if I use my note page to help me, this is called a rhombus. Now, a rhombus has 4 equal sides. Those might look hard to tell, so sometimes I like to get like a scratch piece of paper, and I could like measure and say, okay, well that one is that long. Is that one really that long? Oh, it is. So sometimes I use a scratch paper like that to tell. So what are 2 attributes of a rhombus? Well, I could use this to help me. 2 attributes are, it has to have 4 equal sides. And it also has to have 2 pairs of parallel sides, which means this is a pair of parallel sides. Those will never touch. And this is a pair of parallel sides, which will never touch. Okay, boys and girls, I know this has been a long video, but I want you to hang in there with me. Here is our next thing we're going to do together. I want you to turn to page 3 and let's get a few of these worked on. So our question says, use the clues to list all the possible names for this quadrilateral. Circle the most specific name. I have 4 equal sides. What shapes have 4 equal sides? I know that rhombuses have 4 equal sides, so a rhombus. And I know a square has 4 equal sides. Okay, my next clue says I do not have any right angles. Oh, it can't be a square then, because squares have right angles. So it must be a rhombus. That must be our answer. It must be a rhombus. And that's its best name, a rhombus. But let's look at what else could a rhombus be called. And boys and girls, you're just going to have to really spend some studying time memorizing these. A rhombus could also be called a quadrilateral, a trapezoid, or a parallelogram. So it could be called a trapezoid because a trapezoid has at least 1 pair of parallel sides. I'm going to have to write it sideways because with my marker it's kind of fat. It could also be called a quadrilateral because it has 4 straight sides. And it could also be called a parallelogram because it has 2 pairs of parallel sides. Okay, so a rhombus, I always think of a rhombus as like a square that's been like squished to the side. But it has 4 equal sides, or 4 congruent sides. Okay, let's look at our last one together. This says, identify the most specific name of the quadrilateral in this picture. List 2 attributes. Okay, I bet right away you recognize that this is called a rectangle. And what are 2 things we know about rectangles? Well, it has 4 right angles. We could say that, 4 right angles. What else could we say? What do we know about its sides? Isn't this side equal to that side? And this side is equal to that side. So we can say it has 2 pairs. Instead of equal, we're going to use the word congruent. 2 pairs of congruent sides. We also could have said, because this and this are parallel and this are parallel, so we also could have said 2 pairs of parallel sides. So we could have said any of those. Okay, boys and girls, this unit is going to really require you to memorize these shapes. So I would start studying this page, study this, and start studying this during your independent time. Okay, have a wonderful day. Bye.